Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. A weekly feature on 93.5 FM and live streaming at lakefm.com. Here's the president of the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, John Denuzzo.
Hi, it's John Denuzzo, Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance. For Lake George Battlefield Moments, I'm joined by
Bruce Venter.
And we're on the board of trustees. I want to highlight this week the Battle of Diamond Island. And Bruce is expert on it. And so, Bruce, I'm going to ask you, what's the significance of the Battle of Diamond Island?
Well, I'll tell you, Diamond Island has a special interest to me because for almost 40 years, I have been looking out at Diamond Island from my porch. About 10 years ago, I wrote an article about the battle that was published in a magazine called Patriots of the American Revolution. It's something I wanted to do, and I thought that probably we should also recognize an historical marker on the island so that people, when they come there for their picnic, it's a picnic island run by the Department of Environmental Conservation, that they would know what's going on. In 1777, General Burgoyne comes down from Canada in June and captures Fort Ticonderoga in July. Then he goes over and part of his army fights the Battle of Hubbardton. They fight the Battle of Fort Anne. He continues down to Fort Edward, and then he ends up on the Saratoga battlefield, which Schuylerville was called Saratoga at the time. So south of Schuylerville is where the current battlefield is located. Burgoyne fights two battles, one on September 19th and the other on October 7th. But in between that, he has some problems with his supply line. Burgoyne has to get his supplies from Canada. They come down from Montreal, down the Richelieu River to Lake Champlain. They come from Lake Champlain to Fort Ticonderoga. And then he sets up a supply depot on Diamond Island. And eventually from Diamond Island, the supplies come to Fort George, which is in the Lake George Village area. And then they go down the military road to Fort Edward and eventually get to Burgoyne. George Washington decides to send General Benjamin Lincoln into what they call the Hampshire Grants at the time, but it was actually the state of Vermont. And Lincoln will take about 1,500 militiamen, and he will send them out in different directions to hang along Burgoyne's left flank and do some mischief. And one group of these of his command goes and captures Skenesboro, which we know today as Whitehall. Another group goes to Mount Independence and attacks the Germans who are fortified on Mount Independence across the lake from Fort Ticonderoga. Colonel John Brown, who is a Massachusetts man, will take about 500 men from Western Massachusetts, the 3rd Berkshire County Regiment, and he will attack Fort Ticonderoga. He doesn't have enough cannon to reduce the fort, and he puts a white flag up for the commander to surrender, and the commander decides not to surrender. He's going to fight it out. And so he writes back a message very politely that I'm going to defend the fort to the last extremity. Colonel Brown, meanwhile, will capture a 3-gun sloop at the northern end of Lake George and 2 gunboats with 1 cannon in each bow. And he'll capture maybe 20 bateaux. He'll take about 340 men and he'll sail south on Lake George. Since he's unsuccessful at Fort Ticonderoga, he knows about the supply depot at Diamond Island. And in the course of a 2-hour fight, he will bombard the island. Unfortunately, it's September, so the waters could be a little rough. His sailors are all from Western Massachusetts, so they're unlikely to be very skilled at sailing. So I have to think that many of his shots missed the island and missed the fortification. On the island are 2 companies of the 47th Regiment of Foot under Captain Thomas Aubrey, and there's some sources that say there are a few Germans there. Now, if you go to the island today, you'll see it's a very small island. It's about 200 yards long and about 30 yards wide. So I have to think that the island might have been larger in the 18th century because there was no dam at the northern end of Lake George. And so to let the water in and out and what have you, the lake was probably about 3 feet lower at the time. So it's possible that the island was bigger in 1777. As I said, there was a 2-hour battle. Brown is forced to retreat. As he writes in his report to General Lincoln, I was hauled between wind and water. And so he has to tow the sloop away using one of the gunboats, and they get over to Van Wormer's Bay. And they abandon their little fleet. They burn the bateau and head over an Indian trail over to, which is basically the back road of 9L, at Route 149 and then to Fort Anne and Whitehall. Now, Captain Aubrey will pursue Brown with the boats that he has on the island, and they will recover the cannon that were on the sloop and the 2 gunboats, and they'll basically be able to retrieve some of the shipping that Brown didn't get to burn. The commander at Fort George will report to Burgoyne that we had an engagement with the enemy. They took casualties. We took no casualties. Captain Aubrey performed very nobly. The supply depot is still intact. However, this causes Burgoyne some concern. He's in between battles, and he knows that the Americans are trying to break his supply line from Canada. And I have to think that this was something that really bothered Burgoyne, because he mentions it several years later when he appears in a parliamentary hearing to explain why he lost the campaign and surrendered his entire army. And so I like to think that John Brown was living rent-free in Burgoyne's head because of this action at Diamond Island, even though it was a tactical loss.
Wow. Okay. It's quite a story.
It's a great story.
Now, finally, the story is being told via historical signage on Diamond Island. And I know that was a long-standing advocacy on your part that made that happen. Tell us about that.
Yeah, after I wrote the article and it got some good press, and I ran into someone on the town council here in Lake George, brought that person out to the island. She thought it was a good idea to have some signage, and so I got involved with the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, and for almost 10 years, and the last 5 years, really adamantly trying to get these signs out there, because when you go out there for a picnic, you have no idea what happened on that island. And so I wrote the text for the signs. I got the images for the signs with the help of Russ Bellico and Lynn Holman, who were involved with the Battlefield Alliance at the time. And we submitted it to Department of Environmental Conservation. It got stuck in a bureaucracy that you wouldn't believe for a number of years. And then last year, all of a sudden, the floodgates opened, and we got some people at DEC that were enthusiastic about the signs. And here we are today. The signs have been mounted on the pavilion that's out there, and I couldn't be happier. Andy Niles was very, very instrumental in helping us get through the bureaucracy. And then Luke Daig, located right here at the Battlefield Park, was able to mount them for us, and they just look great. I'm just so happy.
And on August the 6th, for those of you who are listening prior to that date, Bruce is going to make a presentation entitled The Battle of Diamond Island and Signs That Explain It. You can attend a free program. It's at the Fort William Henry Conference Center starting at 7 o'clock, Wednesday, August the 6th. Just RSVP to info@lakegeorgebattlefield.org. Bruce, how can people, other than through your presentation, view the signs? How can they get to Diamond Island?
Well, right now you only can get there by boat. You're supposed to get a permit from the DEC for a day use permit, and they have 3 docks out there. I guess if somebody really wants to see it and they don't have a boat, they can give me a call or get in touch with me through americashistoryllc.com. Maybe we could arrange to take somebody out there. I've already taken a few people. Andrew Menzie from Fort William Henry was out there the other day. He showed up in kit. He was dressed as a Scots Highlander. He had his kilts on and his buckled shoes, and we got him out there, and he just had a blast seeing what that looked like.
It's a truly a beautiful spot on the most beautiful lake in America, we think. It's just enhanced so much for history lovers by having those signs on there. Thank you for your persistence, Dr. Venter.
Well, thanks for your help, John, too. You organized a lot of those meetings with the state.
That presentation, I hope the folks can arrange their schedules to view it, because it will be an unforgettable thing. We know we've got a lot of people who are coming. There's plenty of seats. Just please RSVP to make sure we got enough seats for you. And that's the story of Diamond Island, a victory for the good guys.
Yes, the one John Brown wasn't able to get. I got it.
All right. Well, thank you, Bruce Venter. Again, our website is lakegeorgebattlefield.org. Tune in again for the Lake George Battlefield Moments podcast. And thanks for being a part of our history.
Now, at the end of the day, I don't want to spoil all the fun, but the British would come out ahead on this deal.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance members can participate in a tour of the 3 locations of the Battle of Lake George. We're doing that September the 14th. Members will get that information. The rest of you should join the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance to be able to see it. And John Strow will lead the part of the tour at the Bloody Morning Scout site. We've run out of time, John. Thank you. Hopefully have you back sometime.
I got a lot more to say.
I'm sure you do. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Remind everyone, our Battlefield Park Alliance website is lakegeorgebattlefield.org, and you can go to our YouTube channel anytime to see all the programs of Lake George Battlefield Moments. Thank you for being a part of our history.
Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. For more on this topic, check out the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance podcast, a weekly feature on Lake FM 93.5 FM and live streaming at lakefm.com. For more information, go to lakegeorgebattlefield.org and tune in for Lake George Battlefield Moments.